Hey guys, okay, we're going to start on conception and prenatal development, and this is the first of several parts in the antepartum portion of the class. I'm only going to do a chapter at a time so that these aren't really long lectures and you won't be bored to tears listening to me talk. So the first one is conception and prenatal development. So basically here what we're going to talk about is the production of the biological carriers for the reproductive cells needed to create a new person. So basically it's the production of the ova and the sperm and how they come into being. And how they will come together and form an embryo. So, gametogenesis is just the production of the female portion, that's the ova, or the sperm portion that is from the male. Both the ova and the sperm will each have 23 unpaired chromosomes. 22 of these will be autosomes, and then there'll be one chromosome that will determine the sex of the baby. So, let's first talk about the ovum and how the ovum comes into being. So, when a female is born, she is born with all of the eggs in her ovaries that she will ever have in her entire life. And there are thousands and thousands, more than possible, that could be fertilized and made into a baby. So a little bit of overkill by nature there, but that's what we want. So this is the female part of the gametogenesis. So we start out with a cell, an oocyte, and it has 46 chromosomes. So you've got the 44 autosomes and then 2 X chromosomes. Because remember, the female can only give an X. A male can give an X or a Y. So females can only pass on female chromosomes. The father is the determining factor of the sex of the baby. So we start out with that oocyte and it divides. And so we have a primary oocyte and a secondary oocyte. And what happens is that half of the genetic material, 23 chromosomes, are in the primary oocyte, and then the secondary oocyte, there is a polar body that contains the other set of 23 chromosomes. So then what happens is the cell, it splits in half, and we said part of it will become the ovum that will become half of the embryo's chromosomes. So the mature ovum is released during ovulation, and that is the only time, once it's released, usually within about 24 hours. If it's not fertilized, then it goes on down through the fallopian tubes and to the endometrium, and then it's shed in the monthly cycle. Okay, the other half is the spermatogenesis. And this is the production of sperm. Now, females have a window of fertility. They can only get pregnant once they start their period at somewhere between the ages of 10 to 12 up until the point of menopause. And once menopause occurs, then most women cannot get pregnant. A man, on the other hand, can produce viable sperm from puberty until death. So you can have men who are really, I don't want to say old, but aged, that can become fathers. And I remember that the last time I looked, the oldest living father of a newborn was somewhere around 92. So, it was in an underdeveloped country. He had several wives, and he had a very young wife, and he was still able to get her pregnant, and she deliver a healthy baby. So the spermatocyte results in the production of 4 mature sperm. So one male cell, spermatocyte, will produce 4 sperm. So the spermatocyte has 46 chromosomes. It's a normal cell, so it's going to split into 2 cells, and each one of those cells is going to have half of the genetic content. So it's going to have 23 chromosomes. It's going to have 22 autosomes and an X, and then 22 autosomes and a Y. So then these 2 cells further split, produces 4 cells. And so there's going to be 2 female producing and 2 male producing. So every spermatocyte produces 4 mature sperm, 2 males and 2 females. So the chance of getting a male or a female is equal. They're all produced in equal numbers. So once you have the mature sperm, the head contains the nucleus that has the 23 chromosomes, that's 22 autosomes, and then 1 chromosome that's going to determine the sex of the baby. So conception. You have to have really good timing in order for conception to occur. Because once the ovum is expelled from the ovary during ovulation, and while it's in the fallopian tube, it has about 24 hours once it's expelled to be fertilized. So there's a really short window in there, but you have to think about sperm can survive 1 or 2 days. So even if you don't have sex on the day of ovulation, if you've had sex a couple of days before and there's still live, viable sperm in the fallopian tube, then conception can occur. So, once the sperm and the egg join together, the egg is then fertilized, and they mix their genetic material. So now you have a cell that has the normal 46 chromosomes that we have in a healthy human cell. So once that genetic makeup or genetic codes are mixed, then we have a zygote. So the pre-embryonic phase or period. This is when we have that first initiation of cell division. So the sperm and the egg have joined together. They've made a cell that's complete with the 46 chromosomes. So now it starts to divide. And while it's dividing, it's traveling on through the fallopian tubes because it has to implant in the right place at the right time. Because wherever it implants in the decidua, which is the endometrium that's normally shed each month with your period, it has to be in the right place. So, normally that is in the upper uterus, and wherever it implants, then that's where the placenta is going to develop. Okay, so here is a picture of everything we just talked about. So we had fertilization that occurred at the part of the fallopian tube that catches the egg from the ovary during ovulation. So it was fertilized just as soon as it was expelled from the ovary. So you see fertilization occurs, then it becomes a zygote. And as it's traveling down, it then becomes a morula. And then once it starts to really divide, it's called a blastocyte. So what happens is the zygote or the conceptus secretes an enzyme that when it gets to the right place in the uterus, it will attach itself to the wall, and it actually secretes an enzyme that erodes a hole in the decidua. So the conceptus, or the cell, the zygote, whatever you want to call it, it actually has little finger-like projections on it called villi. You know what villi are, that help it to attach to the surface of the decidua, and it then extends into the decidua and will eventually form into the fetal side of the placenta. So by day 10, the fertilized egg should be fully implanted into the uterine wall. And this is, about 10 days. So by now, the female is expecting her next menstrual cycle to begin, her period to begin. And at this time, some women have a small amount of bleeding, and they mistake that for their period. So they don't think they're pregnant. They just think they had a light period. But that's very normal to have that light bleeding, so that's why the woman may not think she's pregnant. Alright, so now we begin the embryonic period. And this extends from the beginning of the 3rd week until the 8th week after conception. So by the end of the 8th week, we've got all of our major organ systems in place, but it's during this time that teratogens can cause major structural and functional damage to developing organs. Now, teratogens are agents that can disturb the development of the embryo and or cause birth defects. And some examples are certain medications, radiation, infection. So this is the time the embryo is very vulnerable to these types of agents that can cause problems. Alright, so we can see that by the end of the 2nd week, implantation is complete. So at the 3rd week, we start seeing the development of the central nervous system. And you can see the neural plate is going to become the brain and the spinal cord. And we know that's going to be the head. The neural tubes are fused, and at about 18 days, the heart begins to beat. So by week 4, as you can see, we have a C-shape embryo. The neural tubes are closed completely. If they're not, then we can see birth defects such as spina bifida or encephaly occur. We also see partitioning of the heart into the 4 chambers starting to occur. So by the 5th week, the head is large, the heart develops its 4 chambers, and the limbs are paddle-shaped. By the 6th week, the ear and face develop. The face comes together. By the 7th week, we see a lot of growth. We see refinement of the extremities. They're starting to grow, have an extreme growth spurt. The trunk elongates, the intestines grow. And then by the end of the 8th week, we can see now what's starting to look like a baby. Okay, so starting with the 9th week after conception, we have the fetal period. And this is what we call the developing child until they are born. So most of the times we refer to it as the fetus. So that's the correct term that you need to be using after 9 weeks after conception. So growth and refinement of the organ systems, the central nervous system is vulnerable. So the 9th to the 12th week, the body grows faster than the head and fetal movement begins. But normally mom can't feel these movements yet because the fetus is still really small. So 13 to 16 weeks, we have rapid length growth, and this is about the time that quickening occurs. And quickening is when mom feels baby for the first time. And usually they say it's like a fluttering feeling, butterflies in your stomach. Some new moms don't recognize that that's the baby moving at first. Weeks 17 to 20, lanugo is present, and that's the hair that grows on the surface of the skin. Brown fat is being made, and brown fat produces heat that helps the baby maintain temperature after birth. So weeks 21 to 24, surfactant in the lungs begins, and that helps keep our lungs inflated once the baby's born. Baby may survive if born. Usually 24 weeks is about the cutoff. But if the baby's born, they usually have a really high risk of disability. They have lots of problems. So a baby born prior to 24 weeks is normally not viable. But it has happened with a fetus being born at 24 weeks and they survive. So 25 to 28 weeks, we have more survivability if they were to be born. The eyes open, and the fetus assumes the head down position the majority of the time. And this is in preparation for birth. So, weeks 29 to 32, the skin is pigmented to match whatever ethnicity the baby is going to be. Toenails are present. And chances of survival are really good at this time. And this has only been in the past, I would say, 40, 50 years that babies survived being born from 25 to 28 weeks, and then up to 32. So, now that we're getting up to 33 to 38, this is when we really have a lot of growth. All the body systems are in place, ready to work, and fetus is getting ready to be born. Okay, so some auxiliary structures that are needed for the survival of the fetus in utero. The first of these is the placenta, and this is a fetal organ, and it has lots of functions. It can be metabolic, it can transfer things between mom and fetus, and it also has some endocrine functions. So this transfer of substances, there's 4 mechanisms. We have gas exchange, because that's the way that baby gets oxygen. There's nutrient transfer. That's the way baby gets glucose and proteins in order for the cells to have energy. We have waste removal because we're taking in substances and transferring them to the baby, so you're going to have CO2 as a waste product. And we also have immunity transfer from mother to baby. Then we also have the amniotic fluid, and it's there to cushion the fetus, to allow development, and to help maintain temperature in utero. Okay, so the placenta. At this point, if you have not watched the videos on fetal circulation and then foramen ovale and ductus arteriosus, then you need to watch these because those videos are really good and they explain it in a lot of detail in a very short amount of time with animations. So that's my suggestion for you, that you go through and you watch those videos, and it's going to talk about fetal circulation, because circulation changes once the baby's born. Then baby is not getting oxygen from mom anymore. Baby's getting oxygen by breathing. So just as soon as birth occurs, then we have some changes that take place in the fetal circulation, and related to structural changes in the heart with the foramen ovale and the ductus arteriosus. So you need to watch that video and know the differences, because once baby's born, you've got to be able to know the changes that have transpired and what complications might occur. So it's going to talk about Wharton's jelly as well, so I'm not going to go over that. This is the example from your book, but like I said, those two videos, and if you go under intrapartum tab and then go to fetal and newborn circulation, that is where those videos are. So one question, the umbilical arteries carry what? They carry B, deoxygenated blood, to the placenta to be passed on to the mother, and the waste products taken out. Okay, so like I said, watch the videos on changes in circulation after birth and be familiar with them. Okay, so a little bit on multifetal pregnancy. This is when you have more than one fetus in the uterus. Twins are the most common form. Twins can be monozygotic or dizygotic. And what this means is monozygotic means that one egg split and made two embryos. And because it's from one fertilized egg, then these two babies will be identical. They'll be exactly the same. They'll be the same sex. They will have the same appearance. They will have the exact same genetic makeup. Now, a dizygotic twin is a fraternal twin, and this is where two eggs are fertilized by two different sperm. And these twins are no more similar than any other siblings. It's just like they were two different babies that just happened to be born at the same time, but they're completely different. So dizygotic twins are more likely to occur in certain families. And with dizygotic twins, usually it comes from the mother's side, because the mother has to throw two eggs in order for fraternal twins to happen. It happens more in certain racial groups. It happens more with older mothers. And it really happens when you undergo infertility therapy, because when you undergo infertility treatments, they implant more than one egg in the hopes that at least one of them will be viable. So that's how you get like Octomom, who had all of these eggs, fertilized eggs placed in her uterus, and they all developed into embryos. Alright, so there is just another representation of twinning. This is the end of the first part. The next part will be adaptations to pregnancy.